honor to welcome in Fox baseball analyst, Hall of Famer, John Smoltz. I've always wanted to talk to Smoltz, and Pat Boyle was able to get him on today. He's got the call on the Mets and Braves Saturday night, Game 2 of that doubleheader. John Salicata here in New York. Pleasure to have you on. How you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I started the show with, John, is talking about, look, the Mets and Braves here, not what we thought it would be in August. We figured maybe, at least I figured, foolishly so, maybe be a battle here between these two teams like we saw a year ago. The Braves have a 20-game lead, 20-plus game lead on the Mets right now. I think the Mets' core is broken. A toxic clubhouse. What are you seeing, what are you hearing from why the Mets have been a disaster this year?
Well, I don't know if it's a perfect storm where the new rules, the roster they put together, you can make an argument that if the rules hadn't changed, that roster could have been more equipped for it. Hindsight's 2020. It looked like it wasn't as an athletic roster that you would need with the new rules, but all that being said, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Injuries to the rotation early. Offensively, I really thought they were going to be better. Sometimes, you get in a funk offensively and you don't do the things you were normally going to do last year. And I'll be honest, I was a believer in the roster. And I did say the caveat would be if they stayed healthy. Now, it's real easy to go, well, they're old, or they're, that's the adage everyone goes to when a team doesn't function well, and it instantly goes to it's an older roster, but an older roster that just didn't perform. Because they had the pieces to perform. And look, the closer deal, that was the worst break you could get. And I'm not saying that had a trickle-down effect to where that led them to the season they had, but that was not a good start to the year.
How would you, John, we're talking with John Smoltz, Fox analyst, got the Mets and Braves coming up on Saturday night, Hall of Fame pitcher, of course. How would you build a staff nowadays? It seems, obviously the Mets went out there and got Scherzer and Verlander, investing in two future Hall of Famers, short-term contract, a lot of money. I like that as opposed to going with, let's say, a guy like Carlos Rodon. But we've seen the majority of teams that spend big in free agency on pitchers, it doesn't work out. And drafting and developing is not easy, and even those guys can get hurt or inconsistent. You being the Hall of Fame pitcher that you are, how would you go about trying to build a pitching staff in today's game?
Well, I know a lot of people or certain entities try to get on me when I make these statements, but it's factual. And we have a bad philosophy overall, league-wide, and how we're treating our pitchers. And their answer is it's a byproduct of youth baseball, and we're just doing what we can because we know everyone's going to break down, so next guy up. I just don't think it's the way that to treat pitching is max effort, max spin, and then next guy up, 4 innings, 5 innings. I don't think we're doing a good job developing in the minor leagues. And what they'll tell you is, well, we get these guys, they're compromised, they throw 98, and we'll just piece it together with 32 to 35 pitchers on a year. Think about that. An average staff's going to use 32 to 35 pitchers. That's not sustainable long term. So if you look about 11, 12 years ago, or even 10 years ago, they started the process of getting rid of the theory that you need starting pitching. Remember, they're going to bullpen the death out of it, And I think that whole byproduct, if I wouldn't say a word if 10 years ago that this analytical information and scientific data and all this technology we had was decreasing injuries, you'd hear me say from the mountaintop, that's awesome. It's actually increased injuries. And so when the Mets went and got 2 veteran commodities that you can count on, that's a byproduct and their salary of not a lot of competition in the starting pitching world. And what does everybody want to get when it comes to trade deadline? Starting pitching. Can't find it. So we're in the mix now of a generation of starting and even relievers that have a shorter shelf life. And where does all the major contracts for the most part go? Position players now. And I just think that's something that everyone's zigging. You need an organization to zag and say, I'm going to start developing starting pitchers in the minor leagues to go longer, to be healthier, and that's a training. That's a I just think it's an effort now that says it is what it is. This is how we're going to deal with it. And as long as arms keep coming, that's how we're going to go about it.
I love that idea. I hope you see Steve Cohen and Billy Epler out at Citi Field this weekend and pass that message along because they need it. I mean, it's not just them, John. You're right. This is a league-wide problem. Even the pitchers that you pay for that you think are going to be good, they're not consistent or reliable or durable. It's a problem. You know, you guys didn't have that. Leo Mazzoni, your pitching coach, they're rocking back and forth. You, Glavin, and now look, I know it's Hall of Famers, Maddox, all these other guys, but you guys posted. You went out there and pitched every year consistently. We don't see that anymore. That's not that long ago.
No, and you know what people forget? We did, at least I did, 14 straight years of postseason pitching, too. So it's not just the regular season of posting up every year. You know, I hear all the time, your team takes a deep run, and there's fatigue and carryover effect, and don't expect those pitchers the next year to kind of be, and I'm like, what? I mean, that's just part of the different philosophy of eras. And look, if you gave me a magic at the run of an organization, this is what I would convince the pitchers and the organization to do, because it's a change in the way that things are going, and the way that things are going might temporarily work, but 25% now, I've heard on average, 25% of every pitcher on your club in the big league roster will or has had Tommy John surgery. That's not a great thing, because we still don't know what the shelf life of post-Tommy John years without being hurt again, are. So I just think that somebody, and nobody talks about it. Notice nobody talks about injury prevention anymore. That was the topic 10 years ago. That was going to be the perfect matrix of why we have sleep studies and this study and that study, and these are all going to be great things. Look, there are some great advances through analytics in the information standpoint for baseball, no doubt. But the bodies are ridiculously strong, lean, no body fat, but yet the injuries, I haven't heard, I can't remember in the last 2 to 3, 4 years anybody talking about how to prevent injuries anymore in the game. They just accept it.
Yeah, right. They just accept it. And this whole movement, to your point, was supposed to be to prevent it, and it's gotten worse. So it's ridiculous. They do need to. Everything's cyclical. Maybe they go back to the old ways and realize that was the better way. We're talking with John Smoltz, of course, Hall of Famer, Fox baseball analyst, has the Mets and Braves Saturday night, and then I'll have Yankees Braves coming up next week. Yankees having a down year too, John. What do you see is wrong with the Bronx Bombers this season?
Well, you hear a lot of people talk about, well, their roster got very unathletic. If Judge is healthy all year, maybe it's a different case. But they went from an offense that carried them the last 6-7 years to an offense that really has struggled. You know, it's a shame, because their pitching is probably one of the best 1 through 12 pitching staff in the league. I mean, they really have the capacity to shut down people. Now, they've had their share of injuries. It's almost a mirror image of the two New York teams having the same kind of problem with the wrong players. They could not afford the Yankees just couldn't afford Judge to get hurt. And so now, on the fly, they're going to have to figure out how they can get their roster more adaptive to the style of game that is now being played with running, stolen bases and putting the ball in play. I mean, they play in a park where you bop it, but they're not even bopping it. They're not even hitting the homers. So I said at the All-Star break, if Judge could come back, or if their offense could sustain while he's gone, and they kind of hold the fort, I thought their pitching would cover for everything. That's a lot to ask, but they never really held the fort. Well, they struggled. So outside chance they can still get, past the teams that are in front of them, but it is a daunting task to win a lot of games 3-2, 4-2, 2-1, 1-0. So that's their plight right now.
Yeah, I'm sure the Braves probably just steamroll them next week, just like the Mets this weekend in the 4 games, and right on into the Yankees. So, John, the real reason why I wanted to have you on, and I do appreciate your time, I was at only one baseball brawl my entire life, going to games growing up, a bunch of games, Shea Stadium, whatever, Yankee games, Citi Field, only one. It took place in May of 1994. Do you recall what I'm about to say here?
I sure do. I sure do.
John Smoltz facing Ryan Thompson, who hit a grand slam down the left field line, if I'm not mistaken. Next pitch, you drilled John Cangelosi right in the back.
Yeah, no, there was a few things that led up to that story, and I do remember it, and I remember, probably taking some pretty good exception to Ryan Thompson and how long he took to go around the bases. And my great buddy and friend Ryan Klesko was playing right field, learning how to play right field, and he made a couple errors. It turned into 3 errors. So bases were loaded. I think it was an 0-2-1-2 pitch. I hung it, and he hit the grand slam, and he did a nice little, it took a long time. It felt like he almost went in the dugout and gave everybody 5. But when you're in that moment, you see things differently than when you step back and watch it 20-some years later. And I decided I really wasn't going to hit the next guy, but I decided I would just kind of go up and in and say, I can't stick around for Ryan Thompson. When I looked up, Cangelosi stands like 2 inches from the plate. And, I hit him, and he charged the mound, which, was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, it was right away. He didn't take 2 seconds. And all I could do is kind of get him in a headlock when he got to the mound. And all that, being said, my dad was in the first row. Can't imagine what he was thinking.
Oh, wow.
It was a weird game, weird season. I got suspended the longest any pitcher's ever been suspended after that game. And Bobby Bonilla, who was, big man, and I mean, looked like he wanted to kill me. He yelled at me or yelled out that I should have hit Klesko because he was the one that got me in that match. But I didn't hit many batters in my career, and that was when you're in that moment, when I look back, would I have done it again? Absolutely not. But the intent was put my head down. I wasn't even aware of who was at the plate until I looked up and met in my motion. I went, oh boy.
Oh, I love it.
And it just, I never was a guy that was ever going to mess with a guy's career, meaning never throw it up to the shoulders, never throw it in places where it could really hamper. And the funny thing is, I work with this guy at the MLB Network, and not Cangelosi, but I had hit, I'm drawing a blank, my gosh, first baseman for you guys that works for the network now. I'm embarrassed.
David
I hit him twice. No, I hit him twice, and Glavine was playing with him at the time, and he went to Glavine, and he said, do you think he did that on purpose? And Glavine goes, absolutely not. I was working on a cutter. He was diving. And reaching outside parts of the plate. And I think over
Cliff Floyd? Was it Cliff Floyd?
Cliff Floyd. Oh my gosh.
You drove Cliff? Ooh.
Trust me, I thought Cliff was coming out. He looked at me, pointed the bat. We laughed about it at the network. We did a whole skit. And that's when it was tough. Cliff had a segment called Tough Love, and I did the reverse, like Tough Love. And I had this, I just could not, when a guy dives, and I didn't really even have a cutter, I was inventing it. I hit him in the quad twice. Like, it was awful. And he did. Glavine reassured him. He goes, Smoltz, would have never done that. I never hit a guy because I couldn't get him out.
Well, that's what made it. I love hearing you tell this story. That's what made it stick out to me because I watched a lot of you guys in the early 90s. I know how great you were. Like, this is old school baseball. Guy hits a grand slam, taking his time around the bases. You're frustrated because Klesko's a butcher out there in right field. You guys are getting pounded. And boom, Cangelosi wears one right in the back, and it is a brawl. I'll never forget it. Matter of fact, I believe you started that game against Doc Gooden, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not 100% sure on that. And
I think you're right. It was the cover of the Sports Illustrated. I mean, if you look it up, I've got Cangelosi in a headlock, and Charlie O'Brien is right behind getting ready to pull him out. And, the one thing I tell people is the bottom of the brawl is not a fun place to be, and that's where you end up. So, all things considered, I mean, I look back now and I go, gosh, what a buffoon. You didn't have to do that.
Oh, that was great. Last one for you, John. I appreciate all your time. Is the NL East over?
I hate to say something's over. I think the Philadelphia.
Oh, I think we lost John. Is this phone call over? Oh, sorry, John. You had a bad connection. Continue. Oh, no, we're going to end it. All right, Patty, you just grab on hold. I appreciate. He's got a bad line right there. I wanted to get him to say the NL East was over, for obvious reasons. But we had enough time with John right there. Look, I love that brawl. Never forget. You go to a base brawl like that, you never forget it. He drilled Cangelosi right in the back, and boom, all hell broke loose. It was a rare frustrating day for the Braves at Shea Stadium. But Smoltz will be on the call for Fox. Pleasure talking to him, Hall of Famer. He's got the Braves and Mets Saturday night, and then he'll be doing the Yankees and Braves, of course, next week.